our show sponsors, the Machinery Update, the Pulse School, and Nutrien eKonomics. Looking for the best ag knowledge from top-notch industry experts? Join Mike Howell on Season 3 of The Dirt, an economics podcast. From nutrient management to the latest weather, market, and ag trends, The Dirt is your place for farm-smart topics to help boost profitability. Dig in and listen to The Dirt on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or visit nutrien-economics.com. That's economics with a K. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Agronomists. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and I am pretty excited about tonight's show. And I can't wait to get rolling on all the diagnostic dilemmas. And this show is going to be maybe a little bit different. We've got some great photos to share. We're going to try and figure out what went wrong, what happened. And if you've got any specific questions or things that you're seeing in the field that you can't quite figure out what's going on, would love to hear those in the chat. And as always, let us know where you're joining from and what the weather like is where you are and whether or not you have your entire crop in. Because for parts of Ontario, I think that's a no. Of course, as always, if you collect those CEU credits, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists tomorrow. Let us know you took in the program, and we'll get you signed up for those as well. So without further ado, let's bring in my guests for tonight's show. We've got Jason Voogt from Field Agronomy out of Manitoba, and Lauren Benoit with Bayer out of London, Ontario. Welcome here, Jason and Lauren.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lyndsey.
All right. Okay, so let's start with Jason. How are things where you are? We're middle of June. It has not been the easiest of seeding seasons. How do things look in Manitoba?
Well, here in South Central Manitoba, where we cover, in general, the crop looks pretty good overall. But it's been a struggle. We've been really wet and continue to be wet. We had anywhere from 6/10 to 8/10 in my area just 2 nights ago. And then Southern Winkler had like 1 inch to 2 inches again. And that's on top of another 1 inch or 2 inches they had earlier in the week, plus hail. So yeah, fighting a lot of mud, pretty sick of mud, slinging mud. I made the comment today about whether this is mud 7.0 or 8.0 right now, because yeah, it just seems like we get rain every 3 days or so. But in general, despite all of that, the crop looks pretty decent. Our corn and soybeans though are good stands, but they're behind. We really need some heat.
Yeah, I think that's a common refrain in some areas. There was a frost advisory in some parts of Edmonton, also Saskatchewan. There was somebody I saw that had frost last night, so it is chilly out west. Lauren, based near London, but you cover a pretty large territory all the way down to Niagara. So I don't know if you can generalize, but what is the overall look for what you're scouting these days?
Yeah, I'll do my best to kind of give you a bit of a general overview, but it was certainly a tougher planting season. There's still beans to go in. We still actually have a few acres of corn that are also trying to go in as well. As you guys have posted, the crop insurance deadline did get extended to get those last few acres of corn in. The crop, it's coming to the ground okay. Some spots better than others. A lot of the crop went in, as kind of Jason mentioned, similar to out west. It went in, a day or two too early, but that was the only chance we had to get it in. So, if it's not in the bag anymore, then, at least you've made it that far. Other than that, we are seeing a little bit of insect damage, and we are about to get a lot of heat. So yes. All of that heat that the West wants, I think we are going to get it this week.
I'm sorry, Jason, but we're hogging it.
Sharing is caring.
I know.
Yeah.
And
you can have some of this.
Yeah, I think Lauren, you might be even warmer than I am. Today we're up to 30 and we are under a heat warning. And so, yes, with apologies to anyone who has wheat that does not need this heat right now, but the corn is going to absolutely love it. We definitely have some decent looking corn where I am here in Eastern Ontario to even really good looking. Definitely some, though, that is a little pale that would like a little heat to use up some of this water. We definitely still have wet conditions as well, and maybe some sad looking beans in some places as well. But really, I would say for where I am anyway, we're doing quite well, especially by Ontario standards. Now, Kevin's out in BC. He is also saying that he needs some heat. The corn's pretty pale, and but yes, that the grass is loving it. And I will say that is one thing the hay crop does not seem to be minding this at all. An early warm up, lots of rain, and now some heat. So we'll see how it goes. Now, but so we do have quite a few pictures, quite a few things that the two of you have navigated this spring, maybe last spring as well, that we're going to go through tonight and sort of go through some of the examples of things that you're seeing and how we identify whether it's insect feeding, whether it's a mechanical problem, whether it's a herbicide issue, and how we sort of go through some of that. But before we hop into that, I wanted to sort of take a step back. And so as agronomists, one of the first things I wanted to cover is when you head to the field, especially if you know that you've got a farmer that's got questions as to, what's happening. I don't know, I'm seeing some things. What are the must-haves as far as the tools that you're going to bring to the field? Jason, maybe I'll start with you. What are your favorite scouting tools or your must-haves?
For sure. Something that's pretty basic that we would all carry anyways for things that we do, but anything to measure plant stand. So your measuring tapes, your foot squares, anything for measuring foot a row, those kind of things. Soil probe. So for taking soil samples in case we need to do something in that regard, if it looks like it's a nutrient issue. Small vials, like just little plastic jars for capturing or taking, if it's, let's say it's maybe an insect issue that they're not sure about, or we're not sure how to identify, that sort of thing. And then any of the other type of diagnostic paperwork that we need for sending those kind of things away to get tested at a lab. So, tissue sampling bags, those kind of things. So those are some of probably the top things. And obviously your phone is a big part of it too. Picture taking, I mean, that's the big key right there. And just taking quality pictures from different angles, that type of thing is really key when you need to identify something. And then, just, being able to capture the information from the grower as far as time frame, timing, those type of things are all very key.
Mm-hmm. Lauren, what do you have that's a must-have that maybe adds to that list?
Yeah, that's a pretty good list. I think the only things that I would have, a trowel is always helpful, just a small shovel to dig up any root issues. Sometimes a jug of water is actually really helpful to, clean those roots off if you want to get a better look at them.
That's good.
And then I'll reiterate the phone and the notebook to take good notes, take a lot of photos. I noticed actually putting slides together for this that I don't have near as many photos as I thought I did of some things. So the phone and the notebook are kind of, if you only could bring two things, that's probably where I would start.
The other thing I would mention to add is Kleenex. So for the tears.
I was going to say, do you have seasonal allergies?
You have to tell them it's going to cost them money to spray for this or that or whatever.
For that, there you go.
Yeah,
I like the customer service aspect there, Jason. One thing I will mention, and we've had this conversation many times, and I think we've even written some articles on it, is how to take good diagnostic photos, and just how, yes, our phones take phenomenal photos, but you can still screw it up in that if you don't have something for scale, or if you don't put it against a white background or something like that. Sometimes what we see, no matter how good our phones are, what we see with our eyes is not what shows up on the photo. So it's always good to really try and think about, okay, am I showing what needs to be seen and to scale in these photos? So yes, Warren adds a phone to geo-reference spots so you can actually return to the same spot. Also very important. Yes. Did we do flags before? I don't know. Is that what we did? Did we guess?
Yeah.
How did we go back to the same spot?
And that's a good point. Flags are still important too, but with a lot of our technology. So we use a scouting app from Fargo, North Dakota, from a company called Farm QA. And so all our field borders, all our boundaries, everything of our customers' fields are in that. And so you can always drop a point wherever you see something within that field, and it's all geo-referenced. So that's a good key point there that Warren makes.
Mm-hmm. Lauren, how many apps do you have on your phone related to scouting? Is it more than 3? Oh, oh, there you go. You froze for a
Oh,
second.
I actually don't have. I actually don't have. Sorry, yeah, you cut out for a second. I actually don't have too many, but Climate Field View is really the one I use. If you have a customer with climate, back to that point about scouting and dropping pins and taking notes, and then really like the Google browser and knowing which website you need to go to, I find
Yeah.
is a little bit more useful than any one specific app. The pest, and again, it's not an app, but the crop protection hub is kind of one
Yeah.
that I use
Mhm.
fairly frequently. And just the calling other people is also one that is probably my most used app when it comes to scouting and figuring out
Mhm.
problems. Giving someone a ring and seeing if they've had a similar issue.
Yes, that's a very good point, Lauren. So I hope you're better than me at naming people actual names in your contact list because I tend to give people nicknames, and I've realized this is a problem if I want somebody else to call someone on my phone. They don't know who the nicknames are, and so I should probably be far more accurate with who's in my phone. So that is also a very good point. Okay, and we learn together. So I like that one, Lauren. Jay Wetter is on the chat, and he's got the Canola Council's got a great article that he shared the link to on photography tips for agronomy. We've done them as well, and yes, Greg Sekulich insisted that we create them. We've got one on realagriculture.com as well, and Greg does love to take really fancy photos, so that might have something to do with it. But it is true. A good photo of what you're looking at makes all the difference. And so let's get into some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. Perhaps we'll start with Lauren on your end. Let's start, producer Jay, if you would, Lauren's first slide that's got some examples of some early issues that we have been dealing with. So I will put it out before we go through and talk about each of these. If anybody in the chat wants to take a guess or wants to look very smart on what they're seeing left to right, now is your chance to weigh in on that. But before we go through each of these, Lauren, it has been a very challenging planting season for sure. How frequent are you heading to the field to be doing things like digging up things like this and farmers concerned about seedlings looking pretty rough?
Yeah. So we mentioned that my territory kind of is London to Niagara. I covered that with 2 other agronomists as well, and I actually run our research program is kind of my core piece of the team. So I'm obviously still in the field looking at plots and everything. They're in the field a little bit more than I am. But I would be out there, a few times a week looking at different things, or if they've seen something, I'll tag along with them and go and check it out too. But to get into this, actually, those 3 photos on the left, those are actually from one of our research plots where we had an issue all on our own, and I can kind of get into describing what's going on.
Yeah, what am I looking at on the far left?
Yeah, so these photos, all 3 of them were kind of taken within probably a few feet of each other. This is actually, it was untreated soybean seed. So there was really no insecticide protection on it. On the left, we're looking at some slug feeding there. That was something that we did see very, very commonly this year, I found. With just such a wet spring, it didn't really get hot or anything to get the beans out of the ground. And those kind of bites out of the cotyledons would be pretty stereotypical slug damage from them. And then that photo kind of right in the middle of the screen, that would be seed corn maggot. So both of these showed up in the same field. With these specific pests, this is a trial area. The year before, there was some cover crop there that got burned down, which, there was a little bit more residue there. So a really great habitat for insects, which led to some of these issues. The photo in the corn picture on the other side of the screen, that's what slug damage in corn looks like. As far as, which crop to be more concerned about, I'm going to say I feel like most of the cornfields I was in this year had at least a little bit of slug feeding on them. For the most part, the corn's going to grow out of it. You need to have a lot of defoliation before you see any yield impact at all. So it raises a few questions, but it's really not a concern. Soybeans, on the other hand, back to that photo on the far left, if those cotyledons do get totally eaten off, you can see plant death from them and a reduced stand. So slugs probably not going to be a replant issue in corn very often, but given enough pressure, absolutely could be with soys.
Mm-hmm. Now, okay, so slugs are mollusks, I learned. They are not insects.
Yes.
And so insecticides do nothing on slugs. Does anything work on slugs beyond wasting beer in pans? That's about it.
Yeah, anybody can chime in to see if they have a different answer or a solution that I haven't found yet. There's bait products that you can use to try and pull them away from the plant. Everything that I've heard and everything that I've looked up, I don't actually have much experience trying them myself, but everything I looked up said that it's not worth your money, and it's a little bit of a Hail Mary when you get to that point. So really, other than maintaining, slugs are kind of something where, if you have a clean seed bed and better planting conditions, that's when you're going to have, you need to set yourself up for success rather than trying to wait for the problem to control it. So, making sure your furrows, making sure you're planting into, a clean seed bed, making sure there's no residue around that seed, and really planting into good conditions is going to be your best defense against slugs.
Mm-hmm. Now, corn seed maggot, although it has corn in the name, it does impact more than corn. It is not just a corn issue. So what does corn seed maggot love?
Cool, wet conditions would be it. It'll eat, as you mentioned, kind of corn and soybean. This was something that stumped my summer students for a little bit when I told them we were looking at corn seed maggot, and they are sharp enough to realize we were standing in a soybean field, or what was left of the soybean field.
Yeah.
But yeah, cool, wet conditions. Again, back to that residue issue. It'll keep the ground a little cooler. And that's where you're going to find them, which is pretty much exactly what we had for a good piece of the spring.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the comments, we also have Peter Johnson is complaining about groundhogs, which definitely an issue out west, I know. I have not had an issue here in Ontario, but Warren points out probably because I have a coyote problem. So if you have a coyote problem, you don't have a groundhog problem, everybody, just so you know. And I have a coyote problem. So there you go. Jason, though, that it's a good question. Being in Manitoba, there are a lot of Richardson ground squirrels and other varmints that may make hills and eat things. Is it an increasing issue in Manitoba, or how's it going out there?
Well, it's been kind of consistent, but it's kind of interesting you bring it up because I have noticed some of that this year too. You'll see little patches in the field where this canola area, and they don't seem to be very specific to crops. They like canola, they like peas. Doesn't seem to matter. Broadleaves, and you'll see this little circle around close to a hole. It's like, oh yeah, okay, here we go. I want to say that probably 2-3 years ago, we had a bigger problem than now. And just oddly enough that you mentioned the coyotes, I've seen probably 4 last week within the same week in the area running around in the daylight. So to me, I'm thinking, well, there might be that shift of predator to prey and maybe see a lot less of them. But there was definitely a few years ago, a lot more pressure from the ground squirrels.
Yeah. So now groundhogs are bigger than ground squirrels, everybody. They do make a mess they make these big mounds in the fields. And Peter's saying that he walked a field that definitely saw some major damage from them. So I do not recommend getting coyotes. However, they may keep things in check. So just putting that out there, get some sheep that will lure in the coyotes, and then the coyotes will take care of your groundhogs, Peter. So get some sheep. There you go. Okay. So Ray wants to know, what was the story on Lauren's corn photo? Was it sandblasting, cereal leaf beetle? No, that was slug damage, right, Lauren? In that last slide? That's what it looks like. So but it does look a little bit like that window painting that cereal leaf beetle will do, though, right?
I thought that too, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, and that specific photo, I kind of took it was just off the headland. Kind of along a bush, so it was an area that was shaded a little bit more. The whole field didn't look like that by any means, but yeah, it was slug feeding.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so it does look similar than what we see with cereal leaf beetle with that window painting. Now let's shift gears a little bit. Let's go back. And slugs leave a slime trail. Cereal leaf beetle doesn't, says Peter. But cereal leaf beetle makes a poop backpack. So
It
it
does.
has other things other than a slug
Mhm.
trail or a slime trail. I hate slugs. They're gross. Okay. Just let's hop to producer Jay, if you would, to Jason's oat photos. So we'll shift gears a little bit from some feeding issues to some seeding issues. And if this isn't a testament to how beautiful and sticky Manitoba soil can be, I don't know what is. But Jason, what's going on here?
Yeah. So if you want, Pete, producer Jay, do you have that other picture of the oats sitting on the surface there? Yeah, there you go.
There
So
you
if you
go.
kind of zoom in, you'll see that the furrow is basically open, and you can see the oat seed sitting on the ground there. So one of the things we do is we follow our growers' drills, planters, checking on placement, singulation, everything, and actually you can see a wire worm in there too. Oh, I didn't. I just noticed that now.
There you go.
Interesting.
Okay. Go,
And
go scout
so
that field tomorrow. There you go.
and so when we do this, obviously we're making sure that things are in the ground at the right depth. And in this particular case, like a lot of the seeding conditions, we were like maybe 3-4 days really from being ideal. So it was sticky. And what I was finding is I'm following the drill, and I'm seeing in a number of different rows where the oat seed's just sitting on top. It's not getting in the ground. It's not getting covered. So if you flip back to that other picture there, Jay, so driving alongside the drill, I'm looking at it and I'm seeing, yeah, okay, so yeah, what's happening here? Well, yeah, the discs openers are getting caked up a bit there by mud, but the big thing was those gauge wheels were building up quite a bit along with the packing wheels. But the gauge wheels in particular were really building up. And what was happening is as he was going, those gauge wheels building up, basically they set your depth of your seed, your seeding depth. So what's happening is it was actually lifting the unit up out of the ground, and so not getting the seed in the ground at all. And then in some cases, they were getting just pulled back up by the closing wheels and then just laying there on top. So this is a case where, okay, you're kind of on the fly making this diagnosis. And so telling the grower that, you know what, no, we got to stop. The conditions aren't right. You just got to stop. And that's what we did. He parked the drill, which is not easy to say to someone when
Mm-hmm.
when you don't have very many days to seed. But it turns out in that particular case, we got some sunny conditions that afternoon, enough to dry things out, and he was able to keep going. But otherwise, those are the type of
Yeah.
things that can happen based on those conditions, and you got to be prepared to pivot and make sure you make those adjustments on the fly.
Mm-hmm. Who gets to clean that drill?
Not the agronomist, because I I hear
Yeah.
Lyndsey
Oh,
calling.
I
I
gotta
think
go.
I think
Sorry.
I hear Lyndsey. I gotta go.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I gotta
So,
go. Uh-huh. It's a bit of a
but
mess.
but
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's where the hired guy maybe gets the
Yep.
job, or you know what? Just leave it
Yeah.
outside and the rain will take care of it.
Sure. Yeah. What do you call that? It's a Dutch car wash. Okay. Right, Jason? Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Exactly.
Exactly. All right. Let's producer Jay, if you would, let's run we'll run our second read for the night, and then we'll get back into some of these diagnostic dilemmas right after this. Our sponsors for The Agronomists are Nutrien eKonomics, the Machinery Update, and the Pulse School. From pulse seed quality and selection to made in Canada varietal developments and on to disease management, marketing development, and decisions, the Pulse School keeps farmers in the loop about pulse production. The Pulse School is made possible by support from BASF. Learn more at pulseschool.com. We have a Pulse School coming up about pea leaf weevil. Check that out, which is a good one. Now, yes, Pete says you're lucky you were in the field. Mostly he gets a call when the crop hasn't emerged. So that brings us actually to a really good point. One of the reasons why we're talking about some of these things is, of course, trying to go through all the things that you need to know to try and diagnose a problem. So that's maybe a good question. I'll pose it to the two of you. Laura, maybe I'll start with you. Thinking about, trying to get a handle on an issue, what are the key pieces of information you would love an agronomist that's maybe asking you for advice on something they're seeing? What key pieces of information do you need to have to start digging into some of this diagnostics?
Yeah, so there's always kind of so many different things. A lot of the questions I like to ask off the bat are around, just digging into the problem themselves. So what sort of symptomology are they seeing? When did it start to show up? Is this something that they just saw yesterday? Or is it like, well, it's looked kind of, the corn came out of the ground and it didn't look quite right. So, when did symptomology show up? What exactly does it look like? And then on the management side, anything that they did in that field that they did differently than, the rest of their crop that looks good. So, I mean, how widespread is the issue? Are questions we're often asking. Is this a few acres that are impacted? Is this a few fields that are impacted?
Mm-hmm.
And then really often kind of after that point, it depends on what sort of, if it's what sort of issue that they're seeing. And then you get into asking a few more specific questions, chemistries that were used, what stage was the crop at when any chemistry was applied, fertilizer programs. And then, after that, we kind of start digging into things. But really going into it, you kind of want to know, when the issue showed up, just as much about the issue itself as you can. When it showed up, how widespread it is, and anything really on that front.
Yeah, it's a really good point about the timing. And that immediately, you hope at least they know when it showed up, because that does give you at least a time frame of trying to line it up with either, a spray pass or a weather event or an insect moving in. Yeah, it gives you some frame of reference. But yeah, sometimes you don't always get that answer. Jason, what else do you usually ask, perhaps before you hit the field?
Yeah, so Lauren nailed the majority of them for sure. Touching on the thing about history, right? So field history. So the cropping history, products or fertility that was used there the year before, that type of thing is also can be pretty important to ask as well. But the big ones that Lauren already mentioned was the timing of things, right? So if you're assessing things like, for example, I was scouting a field this morning, looking at some canola, and a local grower was calling me, and he and his brother were driving by, and so they stopped me in the field, and they have a wheat field right adjacent to the canola where I was in, and so they said, you know what, we're not sure. It was, this canola died. We used a product that was a Group 2 product in our wheat. Forgot that the volunteer canola that's in there is a clear field from a couple years ago. The MCPA in there should take care of them, but we're not sure. So can you have a look since you're right here and let us know if you think it'll die? That's fine, because I'm a great guy and all that, so I'm going to look for them, right? Sure. But they are a customer anyway. So, but the key was, okay, guys, what was the rate equivalent of MCPA used in there? How long ago did you spray it? Right? And so, and what stage were the weeds at that particular case? And because of the way this situation has been here in Manitoba, if we've either been wet or we've been super windy, a lot of guys are spraying volunteer canola when it's pretty much bolting to flowering by the time we've been able to get in there. So not ideal conditions. And that's what the case was here too. But he says, okay, 5 days. That's when it was sprayed. So now going in, I can have a better idea of, okay, 5 days ago, this is the product they use. This is the symptomology I'm seeing. Kind of come up with a bit of an idea of whether I think it'll get controlled or not. So that was just a small part of it. But yeah, the big thing is just the key, even the groups, the herbicide grouping and the history, field history. Oh yeah, we had clear field here 2 years ago. Oh, okay. Yeah. Right. So
yeah, for sure. I think the issue of here in Ontario this year, we had so much heat accumulation early. The weeds really got ahead of, and then we couldn't get the crop in the ground or necessarily spray. Like, we have some very large weeds that are past the point of easily controlling. Lauren, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna, on that point, like, it was with how small the window was to get everything done this spring, often you prioritize planting over your herbicide pass. And yeah, there's, I don't know if it counts as an escape if you never even got your herbicide down, but there's certainly fields that cleanup pass is going to be pretty important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe adjust your expectations. As you mentioned, Jason, trying to control canola that's bolted or, in early flower, you might
Yeah,
it's more revenge at that point than anything
exactly.
else. Yeah, you're not really getting control. Okay, so good advice there though, and always important, I think. What I think is important too to think about is, as someone who, sometimes fields these questions or has these questions that I put to agronomists and those sorts of things, is trying to think about all of those details, the things that I think maybe don't matter. Um, they might, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, so really important to think about, like as both you mentioned, the field history or maybe what herbicide tolerant traits were in there. So what the volunteers may have. All of those things are not necessarily always top of mind. So good records, everybody. Keep good records.
Mhm.
Okay, let's look at some corn. We've got a couple different issues in corn. Let's start maybe with Jason's corn slides, producer Jay, if you would. I'm glad we call producer Jay Jay and not Jason, or else we'd have a very confusing evening. Okay, so someone went along and plucked these corn plants out of the ground and laid them here for you, Jason.
Mhm.
What did you see in this field, or why did the farmer call you, or did you find this?
I found this because it's one of our consulting fields that we. So I was driving these fields for emergence and plant population and weed scouting. The field had a pre-emerge put on, so it was fairly clean to start with, but pretty wet. And any of these lower depressions where it was kind of wet, where water had stood, was noticing quite a few of these corn plants that were plucked out. And I've seen this before, so I kind of knew what it was. But it's
Mm,
just one of those things where you get a situation where we had such a wet season. It does bring along some other type of pests,
mm,
sort
mm-hmm.
of pests.
Sort of.
In this
Mm-hmm.
case, it was the fearsome cobra chicken.
Yes.
So
I do
yeah,
not like the cobra
exactly.
chicken.
And so
Yeah.
what Canada geese will do is they'll pluck the corn
Jerks.
plant out of the ground, eat the seed, and leave the rest of the plant there on the surface.
So they like the chips, not the salad. They just eat the corn.
Exactly.
That's
The
it.
cou-
They just eat the corn and move on.
they eat the
What?
croutons and leave the salad.
Yeah.
So
What absolute jerks.
they are. They really, really
Okay.
are. And
Yeah.
so, thankfully,
Wow.
for the most part, in most conditions, it's just a small little area, maybe a couple spots in the field. But it's one of those things where, knowing this, the grower sees it and he says, "What's going on?" At least you have an
Yeah.
idea of what to tell him.
Yeah.
I did have a producer a few years ago, though, that had a field next to a very large lagoon from the
Mm.
town of Winkler, and I mean, perfect scenario, right? They're sitting in this lagoon, and then, oh hey, we're gonna go over here to have lunch,
Yeah.
and they took out quite a few plants in that case. But it's most of the
Yeah.
time it's more of an oddity than anything. But
Mm-hmm.
that's what was going on here.
Okay. Now, Lauren, you've got a slide. Producer Jay, I think it's the second one of Lauren's on feeding. It is not insect damage. So
Yes. So
different but similar. Oh, I think she's frozen. How come when she freezes, it's a beautiful picture, and when I freeze, I look like a troll? Couldn't someone
oh,
explain
I'm
that to me?
frozen.
Yeah. Oh, there. Okay, you're back.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
No, that was funny. As Jason was talking, I was like, I'm pretty sure I know exactly what that is. So, same problem here. Apparently, a national issue, but this is again, feeding from birds in a field. Often, when you're looking at them, you'll see the plants pulled out, the seeds are gone. I often look for any, sometimes you get lucky, you see footprints,
Yeah.
or just like those digging patterns. In this specific case, I borrowed these photos from Tyler Sibeli down in Essex County because in this situation, actually, one of these rows was a little bit more shallow, a little bit shallower than the others, and they found it and they just went right
Interesting.
along one row. But yeah,
Wow.
again, to your point, around often if you're by a conservation area, you'll
Mhm.
see a little
Yeah.
bit more of this field edges. And yeah, so again, not a whole lot you can do about it. It's just a bit of a shame, but that is what's going on.
Yeah. So I've often heard, geese being an issue with winter wheat. So early in the season, it's one of the only, things that maybe have greened up. And I know that Warren has had issues with, heavy bird feeding early on in winter wheat, even taking out a stand if it's bad enough. I didn't realize they came along and ate corn
Yep.
because I feel like they should have moved on by then, to be honest. But perhaps I'm being rude and asking them to go north. But I do not like them, so I would like them to. So I did not realize this was such an issue, and that it has such telltale signs of being like plucked out and the seed gone. And
Yep.
so, Lauren, you said that they followed this one particular row, but they don't always follow a row. They just did because it was shallower.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, often you will see like a few in a row once they realize how
Yeah.
you've planted, like a little buffet table.
Right.
So often you'll see kind of a few in a row missing, but it's not always the case. To me, the telltale signs are a little bit of scratching in the dirt, or just the seedlings left there without the seed
Yeah.
on them.
Yep.
And there's very rarely any damage to the seedlings themselves. So like the leaves are totally intact. It's not like they chew on the leaves before they know exactly
Yeah.
what they're doing. They pull it out of the ground and they eat the seed, and then they move on to the next one.
Yep.
Like as a Canadian, I feel like we need to apologize to everyone for the Canadian geese because they don't really represent us, you guys. They're jerks. Kevin shares, and I can share. Has if anyone has ever experienced bear damage, occurs once corn cobs are near maturity and can make serious damage in their area close to the river or mountains. So I will say, Kevin, we are very far apart geographically, but the last year we grew silage corn. We had our front field sort of has a bit of a rise in the middle, and so the back of it is quite hidden. It backs onto another 100, 200 acres. That's all bush. And we had a bear come in and over a couple days just annihilated like huge areas right along the bush line. Like just came in, and it's almost like they just like start grabbing stalks and eating corn, like in just sort of in a circle, and then they just flatten it all down. Like it's just, yeah, it's they can do a lot of damage in corn late in the season for sure. So at the same time they're bears, so I'm just gonna let them. I'm not gonna do anything about the bears. They can just have the corn. But yes, I have seen it too. Yeah. And Warren says farms in the Pontiac, which is very close to where I am, just the other side of the river, the Pontiac region of Quebec, don't grow corn next to the mountains because of the bear damage. And I will say the mountains, you're being fast and loose with mountains there, Warren. They're the Gatineau Hills. They're not quite mountains, but by Manitoba standards, they're like Everest, Jason. That's all you need to know. So there you go. Kevin suggests that corn gives them a tummy ache and they start rolling, and that's why they make that big flat area. I think they just like the bed, Kevin. I think they like to make a cozy bed. Anyway, okay. Let's go. I think this is a good one. Let's talk about some weed issues, or rather some lack of control, perhaps, or some drift issues. Let's go to Lauren's slide 3, producer Jay, if you would. Okay. So, Lauren, walk us through what symptomology are we looking at? Why do I know what this is, or should I know what this is?
Yes. So this was actually photos from this year. It's the symptomology was right along the field edge, worse on the edge nearest to that grass laneway, and then as you moved into the field, it got a little bit better as you moved in. So I mean, when you see an injury gradient like that, your first thoughts are it's some sort of off-target movement, some sort of drift for something. So in this case, the symptomology that we're looking at here, we call them kind of drunk corn plants sometimes. So, the stalk is starting to lose integrity. It's falling over a little bit. You do have leaves just wrapping themselves up a little bit more than you would normally see, and the crop just doesn't look like you would want it to. So actually what happened in this scenario, we couldn't figure it out, but Peter's close. This actually wasn't that grass laneway strip got sprayed with 2,4-D, and it just blew into the field a little bit. So I did use this picture though because we have seen other issues. Dicamba, once you're past that 4 or 5 leaf stage in corn, which comes up fast, you're going to see kind of symptomology like this. So it's group 4 injury in corn. And then with a field like this as well, this is just drift. So probably not too much of a concern, but if a whole field gets hit with a late group 4 application, it's kind of something where, again, not a whole lot you can do about it, but you're likely going to see malformed brace roots later in the season. Stock strength is going to be compromised later, and you might want to prioritize it for early harvest. So back to that note taking and making notes for yourself. That would be something where if you do have a late applied group 4 in corn, obviously you can't do anything about it this season, but you can make notes to make sure that crop gets off as best as it can.
Yeah.
And that's a good point back to the history too, because we've seen issues like this before where there hasn't been any drift of a herbicide, and it comes back to that particular hybrid and looking at the weather conditions and seeing things like this that look like rapid growth syndrome. That can also have a very similar look to this. And some hybrids from different companies are more notorious for doing it than others, where you have like this kind of a cool period, and then all of a sudden you get this real zinger weather like you were talking about, Lyndsey, that you're going to be getting here. And they just start growing rapidly and just can't keep up with the distribution of the hormones within the plant. And so you get this, like Lauren said, the drunk corn look.
Drunk. I like that. They're weaving all over the place. Yeah, exactly. Stumbling home. I like it. So Jay Wetter. Okay, you guys, we've got a J and a Jason and a J. Somebody, come on. So Mr. Wetter says, Jason, are you seeing more drift damage in Manitoba with people forced into less than ideal spray conditions? For example, when it's windy. And Lauren, actually, I'll after Jason, I'll ask you this sort of as well, in that we have two scenarios, similar but different, where exactly that when the window is tight and you still need to get across those acres, are you seeing more drift damage or more calls about possible drift damage?
Yes, we are, actually. And it was something I kind of wondered that we might see after the slides. If you have my slides there from the canola.
Yep. Producer Jay, if you would.
Pull those up.
The canola one. The canola group. Yep.
And look, it was almost like it was just destined to have Jay Wetter on the call.
Thank you,
bringing
Jay.
up canola. It's like canola's everywhere. Like it's like this love-hate relationship with that diva of a crop.
It is a diva, but we like it.
Okay. This is a case of scenario from about 10 days ago. Went to this grower's canola field, and you got this yellowing over the field. And if you want to go to the other slides that shows those specific plants, Jay, and this is what the plants look like. And it was very, very heavy on the one headland, the south headland of this half section. And of course, it diminished as you got to about halfway past that half. And so then you start looking at deducting everything. So the wheat field just to the south of this canola. So it was a dirt road, a ditch, and then this other half of wheat. Talked to that grower because I knew him. He says, no, I use this particular product. And the wind was from the west that day. Okay. And the particular product he used would not leave symptomology like this. This to me is very much group 27 type of bleaching and yellowing. And so, so you start looking around, and what it was so this is an east half section. To the south of this was a half section of wheat running east-west. The half section south of that wheat was another half section of wheat that was sprayed with infinity by air. And southeast winds that day. And so what was happening was it drifted over a half a mile from that aerial application. And again, aerial application because the grower could not get on the ground. It was too wet, pushing our timing. So that's what happened. And what also helped me deduct this was the grower I know this is a lot directions, but the grower to the west of this field, he had corn on the other side of his yard that had volunteer canola in his corn that looked like this. So, and he was in that southeast direction as well from where that plane had applied that infinity. And so, so that's what it was that pyrosulfatol, that group 27 that was causing this. So The problem now is, okay, you can kind of come to understand what's going on. The first question to the grower is the canola
Yeah.
going to be okay?
Exactly.
Right?
What happens now? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm happy to say that the canola looks fabulous now. Like, grew through it, grew out of it. So sublethal dose, even from an off target. So really, really happy about that. But as to Jay's question, yeah, we're seeing a lot more of it just because everybody's been pushed for timing because we've had so few days to spray when it hasn't been 60-kilometer-hour winds.
Mm-hmm. Lauren, I know, perhaps for the Ontario example, it's perhaps somewhat different, but also similar in that there's a lot of acres to get covered and really large weeds. What kind of calls is your team fielding as far as, either off target or perhaps products not working as well as people would hope?
Yeah, so I do think, this week coming up is going to be, a higher risk week. And it's going to be herbicides applied this week where we're going to maybe start getting
Yeah.
calls in a little bit here. But moving into this week, just with higher temperatures and hardened off weeds as they're growing and they're putting on a little bit of a thicker cuticle to combat the heat. If you do want to achieve good weed control, you're going to want, higher water volumes, the surfactants that are required, make sure they're in the tank as well. And then using your high label rates of herbicides.
Yeah.
So, and then on top of that, I mean, we're going to be experiencing 32, 33 degrees this week, and your group fours are probably not something that you're going to want to be applying just to limit that risk. So I haven't gotten too many calls quite yet for off target movement or drift. But then again, we still have growers that are planting. So
Yeah, exactly.
I imagine our window for those calls is actually going to be kind of in 2 weeks here.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'll talk to you in 2 weeks and see how this week went.
I might have a
Yeah.
different answer.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we're just going to pause for a moment. We're going to do our last read of the night, and then we'll come back and get through some of our last questions for the night. Thank you to our show sponsors, the Pulse School, Nutrien eKonomics, and the Machinery Update. Don't miss out on any of the content we publish. Featuring equipment announcements and coverage from machinery shows, the Machinery Update is a newsletter for anyone interested in the latest technical advancements. Visit realagriculture.com/subscribe to sign up. All right, so we have a few things to get through. We've got a couple questions in the chat that we definitely want to get to as well. But we do have, Peter Johnson gets a gold star. He actually submitted a photo knowing that we were doing this. And he wants to get everybody's thoughts. I think he just doesn't know what's happening. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so Peter Johnson sends in this picture of corn. He'll probably give us the details in the chat. But let's just, you need to ask the questions, Jason. What do you think we might be looking at? Apparently, it's just it's portions of the field, not the whole field. It doesn't look very happy.
No.
But what do we suspect may be happening here? While I pull up the information we have. We don't have lots. I'll tell you that.
We don't have lots. If it's maybe the higher eroded knolls or areas of the field, my first guess would be zinc.
Okay.
But I could be wrong too, because
that's okay.
We don't have a lot of information yet. Because Peter's like that. So
now, so here's the information we have. This is the corn that's behind. There are better areas in the field. It had 2 pounds of zinc and 10 pounds of sulfur in the 2x2 starter band. That's all the info we get. Okay, Kevin Bishop says phosphorus deficiency and reduced growth, Peter adds. Ray says it looks like zinc deficiency. And Warren would like to point out there's a stink bug on the bottom plant. Thanks, Warren. You're just all out there spotting all the insects today.
He's like squirrel.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Lauren, any thoughts? What are there questions that you would be asking, Pete?
Yeah, so as they mentioned the stunted plants, zinc was kind of my first thought, or some sort of nutrient deficiency here. I think Jason's right on the asking about, eroded knolls there as well. Zinc, the other things that crossed my mind was possibly a magnesium or a sulfur, but it sounds like there's enough sulfur there as well. But the stunted plants would I would lean towards zinc a little bit on that one.
Okay.
But
yeah, Ray wants to know, Peter, what was the zinc product? So it says 2 pounds per acre of zinc in the starter and 10 pounds sulfur in the 2x2 band. So I guess the question is whether Peter's going to tell us what he thinks or not. What would be the next step, Jason? And so if we suspect, let's say it's a zinc deficiency, what would be the next step in trying to
Yep.
find more information to figure what it is?
Yep. So hands down, if we've kind of narrowed it to think that we're going to start with the fact that we think it's nutrient. Okay. So if we think it's nutrient, what we're going to do is what I would do in this case is I would soil sample and tissue sample in these particular areas. These would be the affected areas. And then I would also soil sample and tissue sample an area that is where the corn is more normal looking, and then send it to an accredited lab, which in our case would be AgVice, to kind of get an idea of what those limiting factors are. On top of that, though, getting some more history from the producer as far as planting date, was there herbicide used, what was the crop, the previous crop, in this case it kind of looks like might be soybeans, what was there fertility in the soybeans, what herbicides was used in the soybeans, what other fertility was used in the corn, how was it planted, was it 30-inch rows, so those type of things. So those are some things to look into it. And for as far as the actual execution, as I mentioned, I would do both a soil and a tissue test, both to accompany one with the other from good areas and bad areas, and then try to come up with some solutions from there.
So Warren suggests it could be a magnesium deficiency. And Peter, as it was planted wet, fertilizer opener smeared the soil. Even with zinc in the starter, the roots could not access. So we are correct. There is a zinc issue here. And also, we could identify apparently some weeds in there if we wanted to squirrel some more. So awesome. And thank you for doing this. I mean, it's a great example of a picture shows you some things, and that's great. But you really need to ask other questions, maybe take some samples, maybe dig up a couple plants, and get all that extra information and see what was going on there. Yeah, so there we go. Now, I guess the question is, how can you fix it now? Is this going to have a huge issue on, potentially on yield, and can you fix it? I guess that would also be answered by how much of the field is impacted and what can you actually do about it. So sometimes you just have to have ugly areas of your field, everybody. That's just what's going to happen. And you just hope they're not along the road. That's what you hope. Okay, we've got just a few minutes left. Thank you everyone for participating. This is a lot of fun. I'm enjoying this very much. We've got two things. Let's go to the pinto bean question or photos that Jason has, and then we've also got some emergent stuff we might be able to get through. You didn't mention your quad or ATV. I don't know what you call it, Jason, as one of your scouting tools, but I feel like you should, because it shows up in a lot of pictures.
That's true. I guess that is true. I mean, in the early part of the season, that's how we get around to cover the acres that we cover, right? Once the different type of crops get to their certain growth stages, then we take them out and then we walk. So, but that's, I mean, we cover as an entire business, we cover right now about 100,000 acres with us 5 agronomists, and I have about 42,000 of my own, and there's no way to get across a lot of those acres except for a quad, plus the help that we have too. To this case, it's not so much I'm not sure what's going on, but more of a reassurance of what the grower did. So this grower particular planted pinto beans. They were a little bit low on the germ side. So he did bump his population or his seeding rate to try to account for that, but he wasn't really too confident. So he wanted me to go out and see if there was a way to maybe assess what was there prior to them coming up or as they were just emerging, as you can see there, so that if he had to do something, a little bit more drastic, like overplanting or something to try to bump the population, maybe we could catch it early enough. So basically all I did was these were planted in 30-inch rows. I measured out 1,000th of an acre, a number of different spots in the field, so 17 feet 5 inches, and then basically dug up all the plants that I could find, all the seeds I could find within that 1,000th of an acre to find, well, which ones looked viable, and that would represent an actual plant that would emerge. And then came up with the population forum to give them some, at least some feedback as to, yeah, you're good here or you're not good. And in this case, he was fine. He had enough plants there. And at the end of the day, this was just last year in 23, and those pintos did about 3,000 pounds. So,
Okay.
at the end of the day, we didn't have to do anything too dramatic.
Yep. Okay. I do like the very early scouting, going over there and moving the earth off of them just to see. You're a very dedicated agronomist, Jason. Lauren, you've also got Jay. If you could, we'll go to Lauren's last slide. I think it's your last slide. Right. Okay. So these are some emergence issues. These are, I think you said last year, but definitely we're dealing with plenty of emergence issues this year. So walk us through what you were seeing and how we got here.
Yeah, so the photos on the left, those were taken actually up near Bruce County last year on some heavier ground, and really we were seeing beans that were just, they'd been planted and then a hard rain after planting formed a soil crust, and they were not having a good time coming out of the ground. So you can see the swollen hypocotyl, the cotyledons are yellow and kinked over, and of those beans in the photo, I think there's 7 of them there. Obviously, one has successfully come out of the ground. But, the one on the far left has come out of the ground. The next one, it might have made it, but the other 5, those were a bit of a lost cause on emergence there. So this is kind of just something you might want to give it an extra day. But, that's what beans pushing up a crust, that's what they're going to look like. And then the other picture there, this one is actually kind of an interesting one from last year. This was a field that I followed a little bit, but that was actually, so the soybeans did come out of the ground and then there was a hail event. So in this specific case, the hail event took the cotyledons right off, but because there were axillary buds there and that unifoliate had started and had green tissue on it, it did survive.
Wow.
They didn't look great for a little bit. And obviously this would be a situation you're not going to make a call on one plant by any means, and you'd be looking at the whole field there to make a call on a replant after a hail event and based on the calendar. But that was just something I really hadn't seen it before, where it had totally taken the cotyledons off and the plant was still powering through kind of on its very last legs.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'll give a tip of the hat to soybeans on that one, because they're not my favorite, but that's pretty impressive if they're going to do that. Peter laughs and says, "Don't worry, those 5 on the left there just need some rain and they'll pop right up." I don't think so, Pete. I really don't think so. Those ones, rain is not going to help. Now, is there? I think that's the only one. Is there one more? No, I think that's it. Right? Yeah, I made notes, but I scribbled them, and now I can't read my writing. So welcome to my world, everybody. For sure. Oh, we've got one more. The weed strips. I think we want to touch on this one of Jason's that he sent. Yes. Okay.
Oh.
So this one, yeah, this is beautiful, Jason. I really like the uniformity of the weeds in this one particular strip. So before you tell us what happened here, what you figured out, can you give us where in the field is this? Is this like the edge of the field, the middle of the field? Where is this? And let's see if people can guess what happened here.
Yeah. So this is a cornfield, obviously, and it is at the edge of a cornfield, at the kind of the very corner of a headland.
Okay. So that is a bit of a clue.
Yeah, where a grower, when he's spraying, might start his sprayer from, just saying, maybe, and
okay,
maybe didn't spend enough time charging his boom.
Yeah, maybe
herbicide. And this is the perfect setup for Lauren, because this was like our new favorite corn cocktail of Lotus, Pardner, and Roundup. And I have to say Roundup or Adam Pfeffer will get all,
Yes.
squirrely and bent out of shape. Because if I say glyphosate, he'll like
Yes.
rake me over the coals. So
Well, brands matter, Jason. Brands matter.
yeah, but
So
honestly,
yeah, the
that's
rest did okay. That strip, not so good.
yeah, and it was one of
Yeah.
those things where part of what we do, besides is also our efficacy checks, making sure the herbicide worked, or for misses or whatever else. And this is one of those things where, oh, okay. And just by looking at the pattern, and that was it. Okay, was this
Yeah.
an escape, or was this something wrong with the rate? But yeah, you could see you
Yeah.
got nothing in nature occurs in straight lines. So you see that straight line, and you can see how it V's out, and eventually it comes to a point. So oh yeah, okay, this comes
Yeah.
back to boom charging thing. And so let the grower know, they come out and look at it, and so that way they can get out there and take control of what's there, because that's still a fairly significant area affected.
Yeah.
And by now those weeds have gotten huge,
Yeah.
and there were some particular weeds in there too, that like kochia, that we can't just say, oh, we'll just go clean that up with Roundup, glyphosate. No, 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 no. We
Yeah.
need that mix to help with groups, herbicide groups. So that was one of those things where we're picking up what's happening in the field and identifying what's actually caused that, and then being able to rectify it.
Mm-hmm. That's it. It is a very nice example of how well the herbicide worked, though, when you compare it to
Oh yeah,
its friend
it's
next door.
it's lights out.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and
Worked
and it's
well.
funny, we talked about this beforehand, about getting together with Calvin and Jeanette, doing the corn school on pre-emerge effectiveness this year. And I've got pictures like this that show with a pre-emerge and without in front of
Yeah.
corn, but looks just like this. So
Wow.
like really, really, really important this year if a guy could get it on.
Yeah.
But yeah, so very key.
Absolutely. Peter would like to put in his plug for a recirculating boom to solve this problem of not having to charge your boom. You're right, Pete. We'll get everybody switched over eventually. All right, we are running out of time, and so thank you all for joining us here. This has been a lot of fun. I want to end off for both of you just quickly. We did talk a bit about what you need in your scouting kit for sure, information you're going to ask. If you could offer any advice for when either an agronomist is calling you, a fellow agronomist, or or a farmer's calling with an issue. What would you say are the must-haves as far as key pieces of information you want them to have when they call? Lauren, I'll maybe start with you.
Yeah, so key pieces of information would be, again, symptomology, as good of a description of symptomology as you can. Obviously, I say symptomology for crop injury. If it's not a crop injury problem, if it's an emergence issue, just, the absolute best description that you can possibly give us is going to be the most helpful thing. When it showed up, and if you know right off the bat that there's something that you did differently in that field, that would be kind of the first thing that we would want to know as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jason, how about for you?
Yeah, so very similar, but history, field history, products used, rates, those type of thing, timing, those type of things are going to be very key to have as well.
And take good notes. And I don't care where you keep them, just take good notes, because we all say we'll remember, and then we do not remember. No, we completely forget. So write it down. Use voice notes. Use the note app in your phone. Use an actual notebook. But yes, very important. Your agronomist will thank you. Let's put it that way. All right. Thank you, Jason and Lauren, for joining me tonight. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it very much.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity. It was a lot of
Thank
fun.
you, Lyndsey.
All right. Okay. And thank you all for joining us tonight. We had a great crowd on. Thank you for all your questions and for participating. If you've got any questions, you can always zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. If you've got a show idea or someone you'd love to see on the show, you can send those along as well. And we'll be back next week, of course, 8 p.m. Eastern thank you to our show sponsors. And if you collect those CEU credits, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists tomorrow. And we will talk to you next week. Cheers, everybody.